French Connection, The Conversation, Superman. Gene Hackman has died at the age of 95.
For 16 years, one man knocked on the same front door every single week, and on February 26, 2025, that door was standing wide open, and nothing inside that house made sense. No footsteps in the dust, no answer to his calls, just silence, and a smell that told him something was terribly wrong before he ever stepped inside. What that maintenance worker found inside Gene Hackman's Santa Fe home would trigger a homicide investigation, a swarm of federal and local officers, and months of headlines calling it one of the strangest celebrity deaths in Hollywood history. But here's the thing almost nobody talks about once the cameras leave. What actually happened inside that house turned out to be far sadder and far more human than any murder mystery could ever be. Stay with me, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly what the medical examiner found, why investigators were so confused at first, and what it really tells us about growing old, about love, and about a devoted wife nobody ever gave enough credit to. Let's start with that afternoon in February. Jesse Kessler had worked as a personal contractor and caretaker for Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, for about 16 years. He knew their routines. He knew their dogs. He knew what normal looked like at that property on the outskirts of Santa Fe. So when he arrived for a scheduled visit and found the front door open, with nobody answering, something in his gut told him this wasn't a simple mix-up. He walked in, and within moments he was on the phone with 911, describing a scene that first responders would later call one of the most unusual they had encountered in years. Both Hackman, who was 95, and Arakawa, 65, were found dead inside the home. One of their 3 dogs, a small one named Zena, was also found dead inside a crate in a closet. 2 other dogs were found alive on the property. From the very first hour, this case did not look like a normal death investigation. Hackman was discovered in a mudroom near the back of the house, close to a cane and a pair of sunglasses, as if he had simply collapsed while walking. Arakawa was found in a bathroom on the other side of the home, on the floor near a space heater that had tipped over, with prescription pill bottles nearby. The state both bodies were in immediately raised red flags for investigators. There were visible signs of mummification in the hands and feet, and decomposition on the face. That told trained investigators one very important thing. These 2 people had not died on the same day. In fact, whatever happened, it appeared to have unfolded over a span of days, maybe longer, before anyone realized something was wrong. You can imagine why that detail alone sent shockwaves through the department. Santa Fe Police, along with the New Mexico Office of the Medical Investigator, and eventually the FBI, were called in to help process the scene. A search warrant affidavit described officers noting the smell inside the home, the pill bottles, the fallen space heater, and the condition of the bodies. Early public statements from officials used the word suspicious, and for a few days, that single word set off a wave of speculation online. Was this carbon monoxide poisoning? Had one of them harmed the other? Was there an intruder? News outlets ran with every theory imaginable, because in the absence of confirmed facts, speculation fills the space. The gas company was called out to check every line in the home for leaks. They found nothing. No carbon monoxide. No gas leak of any kind. That ruled out one of the earliest and most repeated theories almost immediately, even though it kept circulating in headlines for weeks afterward. Investigators also look hard at the idea of foul play, because 2 people found dead in different rooms of the same house, days apart, is exactly the kind of scenario that demands a thorough homicide-style investigation, regardless of who the people are. But there were no signs of forced entry, no injuries consistent with an attack, no defensive wounds, no indication that a third party had ever been inside during the time in question. Slowly, methodically, over the course of about 2 months, the real picture began to come into focus, and it was not the picture anyone expected. The first major answer came for Betsy Arakawa. Officials determined that she had died from hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare and serious respiratory illness that a person contracts from exposure to the droppings or urine of infected rodents, most commonly deer mice. It is not contagious between people. It is not something that spreads through the air from person to person. It is something you pick up from your environment, often in rural homes, barns, sheds, or crawl spaces, especially in the American Southwest, where the disease shows up more frequently than almost anywhere else in the country. Investigators later learned that in the days before she died, Betsy had gone online searching for information about symptoms like flu, dizziness, and nosebleeds. She had also called a health clinic on February 12th trying to get medical attention. She never received that treatment. Officials believe she died around February 11th or 12th, alone in that bathroom, likely without ever fully understanding what was happening to her body. Then came the second half of the puzzle, and it's the part that turns this story from a mystery into something genuinely heartbreaking. Gene Hackman did not die on the same day as his wife. He died roughly a week later, around February 17th or 18th. His pacemaker, which had been implanted back in 2019, recorded an abnormal heart rhythm on that date, and that data point became one of the clearest markers investigators had for pinpointing his time of death. The official autopsy found that Hackman suffered from severe hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. In plain terms, that means long-term high blood pressure and hardened, narrowed arteries had done serious, cumulative damage to his heart over many years. He had a history of congestive heart failure, previous heart procedures including a bypass and an aortic valve replacement, and reduced kidney function. Laid on top of all of that, the autopsy confirmed something that had not been public before his death. Gene Hackman had advanced Alzheimer's disease. That single detail changes the entire story. Because if Hackman's cognitive decline was as advanced as the autopsy findings suggest, it raises a genuinely devastating possibility, one that medical examiners and investigators have pointed to directly. It's very possible that after Betsy died, Gene simply did not have the cognitive capacity to understand what had happened to his wife, to recognize that she was gone, or to call for help himself. Toxicology results showed elevated acetone levels in his blood, a marker that shows up when someone has gone an extended period without eating. Doctors say that kind of reading is consistent with someone who had gone days without proper food. For a man in advanced stages of dementia, alone in a large home, with his wife and caretaker suddenly and permanently absent, that detail paints a picture that is almost unbearable to sit with. He may have wandered that house, day after day, not fully processing what was happening around him, growing weaker, until his already fragile heart simply gave out. Both deaths were ultimately ruled natural causes. No homicide, no overdose, no foul play of any kind. Just two separate, unrelated medical tragedies that happened to strike a married couple within about a week of each other, in a home isolated enough that nobody realized anything was wrong until a contractor showed up for a routine visit. It is a strange, almost cruel coincidence of timing, and that coincidence is exactly what made the scene look so alarming to the first officers who walked through that door. But sometimes the most frightening-looking scenes have the simplest, saddest explanations underneath them. What makes this story land so hard for so many people is what it reveals about Betsy Arakawa's role in Gene Hackman's life. For years, the public barely knew her. She was a classical pianist, decades younger than her husband, and the two of them married in 1991 after Hackman had already been through one marriage and built one of the most respected careers in American film. But behind closed doors, by every account from people close to the family, Betsy had become his primary caretaker in his final years. As his health and memory declined, it was Betsy managing his medications, his meals, his doctors, his day-to-day life. Hackman's own daughter later said that even in his 90s, Gene had appeared to be in remarkably good shape physically, still doing yoga and Pilates several times a week, still active for a man his age. What the world didn't fully see was how much of that stability depended on the quiet, constant work of the woman standing beside him. When she was suddenly gone, there was no backup plan, because for years, she had been the plan. It's worth taking a step back here and talking about who Gene Hackman actually was, because his death understandably dominated headlines, but his life deserves just as much attention. Hackman started out with almost nothing going for him in the eyes of his peers. At the Pasadena Playhouse, a respected acting school in California, classmates reportedly voted him among the least likely of the group to succeed. Instead of being discouraged, Hackman used that as fuel. He became close friends there with a young, then unknown Dustin Hoffman, and the two of them struggled together through years of rejection, small theater roles, and constant auditions that went nowhere. Hackman kept grinding through those early years, taking whatever roles he could get, slowly working his way up from bit parts in television and film into something more substantial. His breakthrough came with Bonnie and Clyde, where he played Buck Barrow, Clyde's older brother, in a performance that was both tough and quietly tragic. That role earned him his first Oscar nomination, for Best Supporting Actor, and it put him on Hollywood's radar as someone who could bring real depth to a supporting character instead of just filling space around the leads. From there, Hackman's career only accelerated. In 1971, he took on the role that would define him for an entire generation, Popeye Doyle in The French Connection, a gritty, morally complicated cop chasing down a drug trafficking operation in New York. The film was a massive success, and Hackman's performance earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor. It wasn't just a good performance. It reshaped what audiences expected from a leading man in a crime film. Someone flawed, obsessive, sometimes unlikable, but utterly believable. Just a few years later, in 1974, Hackman starred in Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, playing a surveillance expert wrestling with guilt, paranoia, and isolation. Critics still point to that role as one of the finest, most internally complex performances of his career, and the film itself earned a Best Picture nomination. Around that same period, he starred alongside Al Pacino in Scarecrow, a quieter, more melancholic story about two drifters forming an unlikely friendship, and the chemistry between the two actors gave the film an emotional weight that stuck with audiences long after its release. Then, in 1978, Hackman did something that showed just how wide his range really was. He put on the bold cap and stepped into the role of Lex Luthor in Superman, opposite Christopher Reeve. Instead of playing the villain as purely menacing, Hackman brought a sharp, sly sense of humor to the role, turning Luthor into one of the most memorable and quotable villains in comic book movie history. It proved that the same actor who could deliver a haunted, guilt-ridden surveillance expert could also have audiences laughing at a scheming supervillain, and that kind of range is exceptionally rare. Decades later, he'd show that same versatility again in films like Get Shorty, playing a self-important film producer with comic timing that surprised even longtime fans, and in Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood's brutal, revisionist western, where Hackman's performance as a corrupt, sadistic sheriff earned him a second Academy Award, this time for Best Supporting Actor. Clint Eastwood, who directed and starred alongside Hackman in Unforgiven, spoke about him after his death, describing him as one of the most talented actors he ever worked with, someone whose performances always felt real and powerful rather than performed. Eastwood also called Hackman a close friend, someone he said he would miss deeply. Tributes poured in from across Hollywood, including from Gwyneth Paltrow, who had starred alongside Hackman in The Royal Tenenbaums, a film where his portrayal of a manipulative, complicated patriarch became one of his most beloved later career roles. Hackman stepped away from acting in 2004 and made it official in interviews around 2008 and 2009, citing health concerns as the primary reason. In one interview around that time, he explained that a doctor had told him his heart simply wasn't in a condition to handle the stress that film sets demanded, the pressure, the physical toll, the constant demands of production schedules. It's worth remembering that Hackman had already gone through a major cardiac procedure back in 1990, an angioplasty, after doctors discovered a blocked artery near his heart while he was on a trip. He came shockingly close to a heart attack at that time, and doctors credited quick treatment with saving his life. He also survived a serious bicycle accident in 2012, when he was hit by a truck while riding without a helmet in Florida, an incident that could have been far worse than it was. So by the time Hackman reached his mid-90s, he was a man who had already beaten the odds more than once. He quietly built a second chapter of life away from Hollywood, co-writing historical fiction novels with archaeologist Daniel Lenihan, and writing Western and crime novels on his own. In interviews, he described writing as something that gave him a different kind of control, something he could do alone, without a crew waiting on him. He spent his retirement painting, riding, fishing, and living quietly with Betsy in New Mexico, largely out of the public eye. The last time most of the public saw him was in 2023, outside a restaurant with Betsy, visibly frail, leaning on his cane and holding onto her arm for support. Looking back now, that image says more than anyone realized at the time. What happened in that house in Santa Fe wasn't a Hollywood conspiracy, and it wasn't a hidden secret finally coming to light. It was something far more ordinary, and because of that, far more universal. It was an aging man, already dealing with serious heart disease and advanced Alzheimer's, who lost the one person keeping his world steady, and who may not have even understood that she was gone.